people want to think about what is the cheapest way to acquire Bitcoin. How about you seize it? One of the mandates is to study a strategic, now cryptocurrency reserve.
Trump has leapt up in his approval ratings, right?
So being a terror organization is different from being a criminal organization from a legal perspective. Welcome to the Crypto Swamp Creatures, the show you never knew you needed and still don't want anyways. I'm Christopher Alexander, your blockchain and advocacy communications expert.
And I'm Justin Wallin, your guide through the often murky world of politics and polling.
Every week, we dive into the intersection of crypto, policy, and politics without taking sides. We're here to give you the straight, data-driven analysis that influences the decisions of those who want to win or want to be elected.
Think of it as a late 80s newscast, but with a twist. We bring you the serious stuff, but with a dash of sardonic wit and just a hint of irreverence.
So whether you're a crypto enthusiast, a policy wonk, or just someone who appreciates a data-driven approach, this is your place.
We bring you both sides, weigh the impact on crypto, and then we share what we use for show prep every week on our medium.
So remember, no one is as smart as someone who agrees with you, and now get ready to enter the no swamp zone. Welcome to the Crypto Swamp Creatures. Been a while since I said this, Justin. You know, the show you never knew you needed and didn't want anyways. When we started this a couple months ago, we thought, I don't know if there'll be anything to do after the election. That was a crucial or critical error.
Yeah, there's plenty. The world is busy.
So let's start with perhaps the most exotic of issues. Stick around to the end. We're going to discuss what is the single most dangerous job in cryptocurrency in 2025. So stick around to the end, subscribe to all those things that people beg you to. Just assume we're asking you to do that too. And let's get into it. So momentous few days, Justin. We're going to kind of cover each of those across the segments. But there's one area to kind of connect dots that gets very interesting, right? So kind of data point number one is the naming of drug cartels, or the designation, as it's called, of drug cartels as terrorist organizations. Two, we just had the executive order, I got to look at it to get the name of it right, strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology. And kind of lastly, just the more muscular Trump foreign policy and, well, kind of everything that we see. So, kind of across those, what are your initial thoughts? And let's kind of talk about how they connect.
Well, Trump has leapt up in his approval ratings, right? So he's been upside down for years now, and he's now net positive. So whatever he's doing, more people like what he's doing than by a slight margin than voted for him actually in this past election. And, it's the inauguration itself. I'm here in D.C., was here during the inauguration. It's a different flavor than, I think a lot of people said this is nothing new. It's a different flavor than his first inauguration. There is a tremendous amount of activity and not in the form of pushback, whether that's, subtle pushback at the bureaucratic level or quasi-violent pushback in terms of protests that can get frisky the first time around. Totally different animal, and not least of which is evidenced by who he was surrounded with on the dais. One organization, which we've talked about being arbiters of truth, one organization that pursued that path pretty actively and has a storied history with now President Trump. A lot of folks bending the knee, as it were, and just about every industry. Now, in our world, in crypto, the inauguration coincided with a brand new coin and a brand new degree of billionaireship by the now seated president. So, plus there's a whole bunch of other stuff, which you've alluded to, that really is structural and far-reaching in the world of crypto.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's start with those kind of three data points I tossed out at the beginning. cartels being terror organizations, this executive order on cryptocurrency, and Trump being a lot more muscular in foreign policy than he was in his first term. So what's interesting is, and you and I were talking about this earlier before we jumped on, you might think, well, if they're a transnational criminal organization, that's, pretty bad in the United States government eyes, and it gives you a lot of leeway to act. Well, the terror organizations... and
by the way, it might be worth a quick context, because we were talking about seizure of assets, right? And I was operating under the illusion, and you can clarify this, but my assumption was that if you are part of a recognized large violent criminal organization, that the U.S. government could seize assets. And the reason why is, I watch TV just like everyone else, and I have this perception of government auctions of old Ferraris and gold Rolexes and things like that are seized at drug busts and so on and so forth. But the world doesn't really behave that way across international borders, right, with criminals. But something very different happened, which you're talking about.
Well, it can, but so being a terror organization is different from being a criminal organization from a legal perspective. And when we say legal perspective, we're talking about restraints and something called authorities. So when it's a mafioso group, when it's a cartel, it's a law enforcement problem. When it's law enforcement has to do a whole lot more to protect someone's rights, human or otherwise, depending on their country of origin, than in law enforcement. So you go after, you designate a terror organization so that you can use the full might of the United States government with very few restraints. Because when you're a criminal organization, there are restraints. So drug seizure forfeiture, I think it is.
Forfeiture.
Drug asset forfeiture, seizure, something like that. Anyways, when they take your stuff and sell it, they love that. When I was attached to counter drug stuff very briefly, which I did not like, as it turned out, when I was over working on that stuff or doing reconnaissance for those people, when we had to deal with the DEA, if there wasn't a couple of boats and a helicopter, they would leave it back to us. We were an army unit doing this, because the DEA is partially funded by what they seize. And so what you create when you do that, of course, is an incentive to go hunt assets. So let's just file that away for a second, that hunting assets idea. So you have the cartels that are now designated as terror organizations. And that means Special Operations Command, U.S. Special Operations Command, has a lot of options and fewer requirements to play nice with others, which is to say coordinate with embassies, other nations, and other things. So in other words, they can do what we used to call, when I was involved in that stuff, a habeas grabus, which is going anywhere you want and grabbing someone and giving them an all-expenses-paid trip to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So maybe they're going to close Guantanamo, but I assure you they can figure out somewhere else to put them.
It's a big world.
So in the past, say in Mexico, you probably got tipped off, probably from someone pretty high up in one of the ministries, probably in law enforcement in Mexico, that the U.S. government was coming to arrest you or seize your assets or what have you, because the government there's riddled with these narco-terrorists. And by the way, the idea that they are narco-terrorists is nothing new. I think that term was coined in the 80s. So instead of the ambassador and a liaison and a whole series of cooperation happening.
By the way, for what it's worth, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why it was termed in the 80s is at the time when Colombia was the biggest dog in the pen in terms of our biggest issue at the time, which is cocaine. I mean, there was an active war against the government, right? A Congress was being bombed. I mean, judges were being slain. So I think that's where the term came from, because of that posture against an actual government entity. It was no longer drug traffickers murdering each other or innocents. It was a stance of government against drug trafficking.
Absolutely, and so bottom line. Obviously, designating cartels is not a 100% crypto play, right? It's being able to hammer the cartels for everything they're doing. And that's kind of another show for someone else to cover. I'm sure there's plenty of special forces guys that are going to talk about this, and go check them out. However, there's a very interesting wrinkle here. So we've got the seizure of assets. Now let's move over to this executive order, which in another segment we're going to talk about in greater detail because there's a lot more in it than what we're about to talk about now. However, one of the mandates is to study a strategic, now cryptocurrency reserve and the feasibility of it. And I'm gonna read the sentence here. I know I sent it to you, Justin. That is relevant. And by the way, it's a pretty short order. But you know, when I was in the Army and we were planning operations, you know, you would look very, very carefully at these. You know, even if it was a few paragraphs, because they're dropping hints as how they want things to work, right? So here it is. It's section. Let me scroll to it if you care. It's the. Well, what is it? Roman numeral 2, section C, Roman numeral 2. The working group shall evaluate the potential creation and maintenance of a national digital asset stockpile and propose criteria for establishing such a stockpile. We'll talk about it in another segment. However, potentially derived from cryptocurrencies lawfully seized by the federal government through its law enforcement efforts. Now, I had a discussion with a colleague a couple months ago, and I said, you know, when you're the U.S. government, you have counterintuitive and different ways of doing things. And, you know, people want to think about what is the cheapest way to acquire Bitcoin, right? Is it mining it? You can mine it for 52,000, but, you know, then you've got operations costs, and can you make good on it? Do you buy it? Do you buy it low? Well, how about you seize it? And you seize it with
taking stuff is often the most the most expeditious way of acquiring goods and assets.
It is. And you're seizing it with things you already have, doing things you already want to do. So
part of your overhead.
Yes. Now keep in mind that up until the Bitcoin ETFs, the United States government was the largest holder of Bitcoin anyways. And that's mostly because of Silk Road, because back then you bought things in Bitcoins, plural. So the government actually has this large, what's called stockpile, because it's not an asset and it's not held in a reserve. And so part of the idea is just hold it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that again in another segment. But connecting the dots here, designated terror organization, they move a lot of money. We are very good at disrupting money. Like, it wasn't door kickers, you know, bless their sweet souls, at SOCOM that defeated Al-Qaeda. It was the financial crimes and these FinCEN, different types of cells. I met with them. They crushed them. You had guys begging, we were getting intelligence, begging for wire transfers because they couldn't get any money. They choked them off. So they know how to get it. And despite what Elizabeth Warren tells you, you can actually track down Bitcoin because there's a ledger and there's a group called Chainalysis, a company that's exceptionally good at it, and it's the government's contractor. So it's going to be pretty easy to find that money. And it's brilliant politically. Because according to, again, Elizabeth Warren and some leading progressives, there's no use for cryptocurrency other than like narco-terrorism. That's the only use case they've been able to figure out for it. You know, even while cashing checks from BlackRock, which is always interesting how they miss that they buy all that. But and by cashing checks, I just mean political donations. I'm not implying anything else. But and by the way, I would never imply that Elizabeth Warren would lie about anything. You know, particularly Native American groups or anything. But at any rate, if that is true, well, fine, then we're disrupting it. You can't complain anymore, right? Progressives get what they want, and the United States government rakes in all this money. If they're not really using them, you know, hardly the primary purpose. But it is a wonderful cherry on top.
And that's all for this week on the Crypto Swamp Creatures.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the intersection of crypto, politics, and policy.
Remember, the data doesn't lie, and neither do we. Well, not about anything important anyways.
Until next time, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay out of the swamp.